Control is the oxygen of a narcissist. The moment they feel that control slipping away, their behavior changes in ways most people never expect. At first, the manipulation looks small: a few cold reactions, a few twisted conversations, a sudden shift in attitude that feels calculated instead of emotional. But underneath it all, something much darker is happening. Because when a narcissist realizes you are no longer easy to manipulate, no longer desperate for approval, and no longer emotionally dependent on them, they often stop trying to win your love and start trying to win against you. Most narcissists do not leave quietly when they lose power over someone. In fact, some of their most dangerous behaviors begin after they realize they can no longer control your emotions. And the terrifying part is that many people never see this final tactic coming until the damage is already done. The strange reality is that narcissists rarely attack strength directly. They attack perception, they attack trust, they attack your image. They slowly try to turn people against you while making themselves look calm, innocent, and misunderstood. And if that fails, they move to the next stage: emotional provocation. Silent traps designed to make you react emotionally so they can finally paint you as the unstable one. That is why strong people often become bigger targets, not because they are weak, but because they are harder to break. And once a narcissist feels threatened by your emotional independence, the manipulation becomes far more strategic than personal. In this video, you will learn the ultimate dirty trick narcissists use when they see someone as mentally strong. You will understand why they launch smear campaigns, why they secretly provoke emotional reactions, why they try to destroy credibility instead of arguments, and why calm people often scare narcissists more than angry people ever could. We are also going to uncover lesser-known psychological patterns behind narcissistic control that many victims only recognize years later. Because the truth is, this behavior is not random. It follows a pattern built on fear, insecurity, ego protection, and emotional dependency. By the end of this video, you will understand why narcissists become more aggressive when they lose control, how they manipulate public perception, and most importantly, how emotionally strong people quietly destroy the narcissist's entire strategy without even realizing it. Some of the signs we will discuss are subtle, others are deeply unsettling once you finally connect the dots. So stay until the end, because the final realization may completely change the way you see toxic manipulation forever. And if you enjoy deep psychological insights, emotional intelligence, and powerful truths that most people never talk about openly, then welcome to Silent Avoidant. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and stay connected for more content that helps you protect your peace, understand human behavior, and see manipulation before it sees you. The turning point usually does not happen during a big argument. It happens during silence, during the moment you stop reacting the way they expected. A narcissist pays very close attention to emotional responses because emotional reactions give them information, control, and reassurance. The anger, the begging, the long emotional messages, the desperate need to explain yourself, all of it feeds their sense of power. But the moment your behavior changes, their entire emotional system begins to panic internally. Maybe you stop chasing after every disagreement. Maybe you stop defending yourself against every accusation. Maybe you finally become tired of repeating the same truth to someone committed to misunderstanding you. At first, they may act confused by your calmness, then irritated by it, then strangely obsessed with getting a reaction out of you again. Because to a narcissist, emotional control is the same thing as emotional ownership. If they can control your feelings, they feel powerful. If they can disturb your peace whenever they want, they feel important. But when your emotional reactions disappear, they begin feeling something they rarely admit even to themselves: humiliation. The loss of control feels personal to them. It damages the image they created in their mind, where they are always superior, desired, and emotionally dominant. That is why the atmosphere suddenly changes when you become emotionally stronger. You may think the conflict is finally ending. You may believe the distance, silence, or boundaries are calming things down. But inside the narcissist's mind, the situation is becoming more dangerous. Because now the focus is no longer love, communication, or connection. The focus becomes regaining control by any method necessary. And that is when the manipulation becomes more strategic. Strong people trigger narcissists in ways most people do not understand. Not because strong people are aggressive, but because they become harder to psychologically shape. A narcissist can handle obedience. What they cannot handle is independence. The moment you start thinking clearly instead of emotionally reacting, you become unpredictable to them. Strong people notice patterns, they remember contradictions, they question manipulation instead of automatically accepting guilt. They slowly stop seeking validation from the very person trying to emotionally control them. And perhaps the most threatening thing of all is this: strong people recover. A narcissist often expects emotional collapse after conflict. They expect guilt, they expect emotional dependency. But when you recover emotionally, rebuild your confidence, and continue moving forward without constantly needing their approval, it creates deep internal insecurity inside them. Your calmness becomes evidence that their control is fading. And that creates what psychologists often call narcissistic injury, a painful hit to their ego that feels unbearable internally, even if they appear calm on the outside. This is why some narcissists become more aggressive after losing emotional control over someone, not less aggressive. Their ego begins fighting for survival, and once revenge enters the picture, their behavior often becomes colder, smarter, and more calculated. They stop trying to fix the relationship and start trying to manage perception instead. That is where the ultimate dirty trick begins: the smear campaign. One of the most manipulative strategies narcissists use is attacking your image before you even realize a war has started. It rarely begins in an obvious way. In fact, the most effective smear campaigns often sound subtle, casual, and believable. They quietly start planting doubt into other people's minds. Small comments, half-truths, distorted stories designed to slowly reshape how others see you. They may suddenly begin acting like the victim around mutual friends, family members, coworkers, or even strangers. They describe themselves as exhausted, misunderstood, emotionally hurt, or afraid of your behavior. Meanwhile, your reactions, boundaries, or emotional burnout are carefully edited into a completely different story. They may call you cold because you stopped tolerating disrespect. They may call you unstable because you finally reacted to months of emotional pressure. They may call you selfish because you stopped sacrificing your peace for their comfort. And this is what makes the tactic so dangerous. Narcissists rarely rely on obvious lies. Obvious lies are easier to expose. Instead, they mix truth with distortion because believable manipulation works far better than complete fabrication. They take small, real events and remove the context behind them. They twist emotional reactions while hiding the abuse that caused them. They present your survival responses as proof that you are the problem, because they do not try to destroy your reality. They try to confuse everyone else's. The reason this strategy works on so many people is because most emotionally healthy people do not think like manipulators. They assume honesty will solve confusion. They believe truth naturally wins. They believe if they calmly explain themselves enough times, eventually people will understand their side of the story. But narcissistic manipulation does not operate through fairness. It operates through emotional pressure, perception control, and reaction management. That is why so many victims unknowingly walk directly into the trap. The moment the smear campaign begins, most people panic emotionally. They start defending themselves to everyone around them. They over-explain every detail. They try desperately to clear their name. They replay conversations again and again, trying to prove they were misunderstood. And while all of this feels normal emotionally, it often strengthens the narcissist's strategy instead of weakening it. Because emotional panic changes how people perceive you. Calm people look believable. Emotional people look guilty, and narcissists understand this psychological reality very well. That is why they often remain strangely composed while provoking emotional chaos in someone else. They know that once you become emotionally overwhelmed, people stop paying attention to the cause of your pain and start paying attention to your reaction instead. Suddenly, the focus shifts away from the manipulation and toward your emotional response to it. That is the trap. The narcissist studies reactions, not truth. They carefully observe what triggers fear, anger, guilt, sadness, or desperation inside you. Then they use those reactions as emotional evidence against you. A victim may spend months or years trying to survive manipulation quietly, but the one moment they finally break emotionally becomes the only thing outsiders notice. The narcissist understands this. That is why they often provoke reactions behind closed doors while maintaining a controlled public image outside of it. Many victims eventually find themselves emotionally exhausted because they are fighting two battles at the same time. One battle against the manipulation itself, and another battle against the false perception created around them. And the second battle is often more painful, because nothing drains the human mind faster than feeling misunderstood while trying to explain pain that nobody else can fully see. This is why victims of narcissistic manipulation often begin doubting themselves. Isolation slowly starts forming around them. Some friends become distant. Some family members stop understanding them. Some people begin questioning their emotional reactions without understanding the pressure that created them. And over time, the victim becomes trapped inside emotional survival mode, constantly anxious, constantly overthinking, constantly trying to defend reality itself. That exhaustion is not weakness. It is the natural result of psychological warfare that slowly attacks your confidence, identity, and emotional stability over time. One of the most damaging effects of this manipulation is that victims slowly lose trust in their own perception. They start asking themselves dangerous questions. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I am too emotional. Maybe I really am the problem. This confusion becomes even stronger because narcissists rarely behave badly all the time. They switch between cruelty and calmness, between affection and distance, between insults and fake concern. And those sudden changes create emotional confusion that keeps the victim mentally trapped. One moment the narcissist attacks your character. The next moment they act caring and reasonable. One moment they spread damaging stories about you. The next moment they pretend they only want peace. This inconsistency is intentional because confusion weakens emotional resistance. A clear mind is dangerous to manipulation. A confused mind becomes easier to control. That is why victims often spend enormous amounts of energy trying to explain themselves instead of protecting themselves. They still believe the narcissist cares about truth, but the narcissist cares about emotional leverage. There is a major difference between the two. Truth seeks clarity. Manipulation seeks control. And once you finally understand that difference, the entire dynamic begins to look different. You begin realizing why defending yourself endlessly never seems to solve anything. You begin noticing how every emotional reaction somehow becomes more ammunition against you. You begin understanding why the narcissist keeps pulling you back into arguments that never actually resolve, because resolution was never the goal. Emotional access was. As long as they can still emotionally disturb you, emotionally confuse you, or emotionally provoke you, they still feel connected to your mind. That connection becomes addictive for them because it gives them a sense of influence and importance. But the moment you emotionally detach from the game, their strategy begins collapsing. And this is where most strong people slowly begin changing in ways the narcissist cannot control anymore. The real turning point happens when you stop trying to win emotionally against someone committed to emotional chaos. At first, this feels unnatural. Most people want fairness, they want understanding, they want accountability. But narcissistic dynamics are designed to trap you inside endless emotional loops. Every argument leads to another argument. Every explanation creates another accusation. Every emotional reaction becomes another opportunity for manipulation. So eventually, emotionally strong people begin learning a painful truth. Peace does not come from finally saying the perfect words. Peace comes from refusing to keep participating in the emotional game itself. That is the moment the narcissist strategy begins failing. Not when you defeat them emotionally, not when you expose them dramatically, but when you stop feeding the emotional system they depend on. This is why emotionally disciplined people become so difficult for narcissists to control. They stop reacting impulsively. They stop trying to defend themselves to every single person. They stop chasing validation from people committed to misunderstanding them. Instead of arguing constantly, they begin observing quietly. Instead of reacting emotionally to every attack, they begin protecting their energy carefully. And nothing frustrates a narcissist more than losing emotional access to someone they once controlled easily. One of the most powerful psychological shifts happens when you realize not every accusation deserves a defense. That realization changes everything. Because narcissists often bait people into emotional reactions specifically to regain control. They throw indirect insults. They provoke jealousy. They spread rumors. They distort conversations. They create emotional pressure designed to force you into proving yourself. But emotionally strong people slowly stop performing for manipulation. They stop trying to convince everyone. They stop explaining their worth repeatedly. And this emotional detachment weakens the narcissist influence more than any argument ever could. This is also where the gray rock mindset becomes important. The idea behind it is simple but psychologically powerful. Become emotionally uninteresting to manipulation. Calm, neutral, controlled. Not cold, not cruel, just emotionally disciplined. Narcissists thrive on emotional intensity because intense emotional reactions give them psychological fuel. Anger fuels them, desperation fuels them, fear fuels them, even emotional pleading fuels them, because it proves they still have influence over your emotional state. But emotional neutrality removes that fuel. That is why emotionally calm responses often frustrate narcissists more than direct confrontation. A person screaming still feels emotionally attached. A calm person feels emotionally unreachable. And emotional unreachability terrifies manipulators because it represents loss of control. This does not mean suppressing emotions in unhealthy ways. It means becoming more intentional with emotional energy. It means learning when silence protects you better than explanation. It means understanding that not every battle deserves access to your nervous system. Because the narcissist wants emotional chaos, they want confusion, they want emotional reactions they can study and manipulate. But calm emotional discipline disrupts that system completely. Your silence is not weakness, it is emotional self-protection. And many victims struggle to understand this at first because silence feels uncomfortable, especially after spending so much time defending yourself. There is a natural urge to correct every lie, to expose every contradiction, to make people understand your pain completely. But narcissistic manipulation often survives through emotional entanglement. The more emotionally tangled you become, the harder it becomes to think clearly. That is why stepping back emotionally becomes necessary. Not because you are surrendering the truth, but because you are protecting your peace from people committed to distortion. Strong people do not win by shouting louder, they win by becoming harder to manipulate. That is the part many narcissists never expect. They expect emotional collapse. They expect endless chasing. They expect guilt and desperation. But when someone begins emotionally stabilizing instead, the narcissist starts losing psychological control over the situation. This is also why narcissists often intensify manipulation when emotional access begins disappearing. Sometimes they suddenly become nicer, sometimes crueler, sometimes more dramatic, sometimes more emotional. They may suddenly bring up old memories, fake vulnerability, or create emergencies designed to pull you back into emotional involvement. Other times they may escalate attacks because anger feels safer to them than emotional abandonment. What matters is not the specific tactic. What matters is the desperation underneath it. The desperation to regain emotional influence over someone becoming psychologically free. Freedom is what narcissists struggle with most. Not your anger, not your sadness, your freedom. Because freedom means you are no longer emotionally controlled by fear, guilt, approval, or manipulation. And once someone reaches that stage mentally, the narcissist often senses it before anyone else does. They notice the emotional distance. They notice the calmness. They notice the reduced reactions. And that awareness creates panic inside them because it signals the collapse of their emotional power. Many victims blame themselves for becoming emotionally detached over time. They feel guilty for becoming quieter, colder, or more cautious. But often this emotional shift is not cruelty. It is survival. When someone spends enough time around manipulation, their nervous system eventually becomes exhausted. Their emotional energy becomes protective instead of open. They stop trusting words easily because they have seen how words can be weaponized. They stop reacting instantly because they have learned reactions can be used against them. They stop explaining themselves constantly because they have realized some people are not misunderstanding them accidentally. They are misunderstanding them intentionally. This realization changes the way emotionally strong people move through conflict. They become slower to react, more observant, more careful about who gets access to their emotions. And while narcissists often interpret this as rejection or defiance, it is usually emotional self-preservation. The deeper truth is that emotionally strong people are not difficult to love. They are difficult to control. There is a major difference between the two. Narcissists often confuse control with connection because emotional dependence makes them feel secure. But genuine connection cannot survive manipulation forever. Eventually, the other person begins waking up emotionally. They begin noticing patterns instead of isolated incidents. They begin understanding that the relationship only feels stable when they sacrifice their boundaries, emotions, and identity to maintain it. And once that awareness becomes permanent, the emotional dynamic can never fully return to what it once was. This is why the narcissist's final attacks often become more intense after emotional awakening happens. They sense the loss before the relationship even fully ends. And in many cases, the smear campaign becomes one final attempt to regain psychological control over the narrative. If they cannot control you privately anymore, they try controlling how others see you publicly. That way they still feel emotionally dominant in some form. But over time, patterns expose people naturally. This is one of the hardest truths for victims to trust because emotional pain creates urgency. When your name is being attacked, when your character is being questioned, when people are misunderstanding you, the instinct is to fight immediately. But emotionally mature people eventually understand something powerful. Consistency exposes manipulation better than emotional panic ever will. Over time, emotionally stable behavior speaks louder than endless self-defense. Manipulators eventually contradict themselves. Their stories shift, their masks crack. Their behavior repeats with new people. And the individuals capable of seeing patterns eventually notice the truth without needing constant explanation. That does not mean the process is easy. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it feels unfair. Sometimes you lose people who believed the distorted version of you. But protecting your emotional stability matters more than winning every public battle, because narcissists often want emotional destruction more than factual victory. If they can emotionally exhaust you enough, they still feel powerful even when they are wrong. That is why emotional discipline becomes so important during manipulation. Not because it changes the narcissist, but because it protects your mental clarity, and mental clarity becomes your greatest defense. The clearer your mind becomes, the easier it becomes to see manipulation without emotionally drowning inside it. Eventually, many survivors reach a strange realization. The narcissist's behavior was never really about love. It was about control, validation, emotional access, and ego protection. That realization hurts deeply because it forces people to grieve not only the relationship, but the illusion they hoped was real. Many victims spent years believing enough patience, empathy, loyalty, or understanding would eventually create emotional safety. But narcissistic dynamics often survive by keeping people emotionally invested in potential instead of reality. Potential becomes the emotional trap. The belief that things will finally improve if you just love harder, explain better, forgive more, or stay patient longer. But emotionally strong people eventually stop falling in love with potential and start paying attention to patterns instead. And patterns reveal truth far more accurately than promises ever will. This is why the narcissist often becomes most dangerous right before losing emotional control completely. Because at that stage, they are no longer protecting connection. They are protecting ego survival. And ego survival can make manipulative people behave in ways that feel shocking, cruel, and deeply calculated. Some victims describe feeling like they are suddenly dealing with a completely different person, someone colder, more strategic, more emotionally detached. But the reality is often simpler and darker at the same time. The narcissist is reacting to the loss of emotional influence. They are reacting to the terrifying realization that someone they once controlled emotionally is becoming independent psychologically. And psychological independence is the one thing manipulation cannot survive. So when the narcissist launches that final attack, it is usually not because you were weak. It is because they realized you were finally becoming free. The moment you stopped needing their approval was the moment they started losing power over your emotions. The moment you stopped chasing explanations was the moment their confusion tactics stopped working as effectively. The moment you stopped reacting impulsively was the moment they lost access to your nervous system. And while that freedom may look quiet from the outside, psychologically it is one of the most powerful shifts a person can experience after manipulation. Because freedom does not always look dramatic. Sometimes freedom looks like emotional calmness, where chaos used to live. Sometimes freedom looks like silence, where endless arguments once existed. Sometimes freedom looks like no longer needing to prove your worth to people committed to misunderstanding you. And that kind of emotional independence becomes deeply threatening to narcissists because it removes the emotional leverage they once depended on. A narcissist fears one thing more than exposure, someone they can no longer control. Some wounds never leave visible scars. Some battles happen completely in silence. And one of the hardest experiences in life is trying to protect your peace while someone else is trying to destroy it quietly behind the scenes. That is why so many strong people end up feeling exhausted, confused, and emotionally isolated for years before they finally understand what was really happening to them. But the moment you begin seeing the pattern clearly, the manipulation slowly starts losing its power. Because awareness changes everything. The moment you stop blaming yourself for someone else's toxic behavior, you begin taking your power back. And if this video felt personal, emotional, or painfully familiar, it's because many people silently go through these experiences without ever talking about them openly. You are not alone in this. There are people all around the world learning how to rebuild their confidence, protect their energy, and finally break free from emotional manipulation that once controlled their lives. And sometimes the first step toward healing is simply realizing that your reactions were never the real problem. The constant pressure, confusion, guilt, and emotional games were. If you want more deep psychological insights like this, more emotional truths that help you understand manipulation, human behavior, and quiet strength on a deeper level, then subscribe to The Silent Empath and become part of this community. Like this video if it spoke to you, and share it with someone who may secretly need these words right now. Because one video, one realization, or one moment of clarity can completely change the way a person sees themselves forever. Until next time, protect your peace, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the power of becoming emotionally free.